Good day and welcome to the last day of our Divorce Awareness Week. Welcome to all registrants that have registered, joining us on our social media platforms, LinkedIn, YouTube, and so forth. A warm welcome to each and everybody joining us for our last couple of sessions on our Divorce Awareness Week. Today we will be discussing a couple of issues that is quite contentious. Number one is, how do I divorce someone that is a foreigner? And if the person is overseas, how do I divorce a person that is currently residing overseas? We'll be discussing that. We will also be discussing, if your spouse is missing, how would you actually go about and issuing summons against your missing spouse? And then lastly, I'll be addressing two issues of divorcing a narcissist, or a person that exhibits narcissistic behavior, as well as addressing two aspects of abuse that might occur during and even after the divorce, with special focus on economic abuse and tech abuse as well. Welcome once again. My name is Eugene Opperman. I'm a family law practitioner. I've been doing so for the past 23 years, specializing mostly in divorces, maintenance matters, my pet favorite, as well as domestic violence, and then matters pertaining to children. This webinar is presented free of charge by our offices. You can, if you have any inquiries whatsoever, you are welcome to use my personal email address, eugene@oppermansinc.co.za, or you can just simply, if you have an inquiry, draft it to our general mailbox, info@lunchandlearn.org.za. What we will be discussing today, as I've mentioned, is if you are married overseas or to a foreigner, what is the process that needs to be followed in terms of the South African law? What would happen if your spouse is missing? You can't find your spouse. How would the courts deal with that? And then dealing with narcissism and people that are narcissistic when it comes to divorce. A couple of tips on how to deal with an ex that is a narcissist. I could just have a legal disclaimer on specifically that I am not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and I do not portray to be as such, and I will give you the context of narcissism in a legal perspective only. Lastly, I will also deal with how to deal with being abused during or even after divorce, specifically the effects of emotional abuse and economic abuse during the divorce process. So just to get a couple of logistics out of the way, if you have registered for this webinar, you would have received a link that would have brought you to this page, and where you could watch, obviously, the live webinar. Together with that, you would also have access to the resource and templates tab right at the top right on your screen, where you would have access to all the documents that we will be referring to during the course of this webinar, as well as the two ebooks that I will be referring to during the course of our Lunch and Learn hour today. But without further ado, let's talk about international divorces. Now, international divorces are basically, if one sums it up and breaks it down, it just basically means that it is a foreign or international divorce that would happen where at least one of the spouses is a foreign national or then of origin of another country. So in practical terms, it could happen that if you are married to a foreign national and they have left South Africa, you can still institute divorce proceedings in South Africa. Or if you are a South African, but you have left South Africa, you reside elsewhere abroad, then yes, obviously your spouse, if he is still resident, he or she is still resident here, then you can also file for a divorce throughout the South African courts. At least one of the parties needs to be domiciled in South Africa in order to establish jurisdiction so that the courts might actually hear the matter. Foreigners coming in from abroad that are not South African citizens, if they are residing in South Africa and they have been doing so for a period of more than 1 year, can also make use of the divorce courts in South Africa in order to institute divorces. So if you are married overseas, or you're married with a foreigner, now In terms of today's global economy and the ease of which we can travel abroad, you just basically need a passport, then you can travel abroad. I'm thinking of people marrying South Africans, marrying overseas, going to Mauritius, doing an island marriage, and so forth. So how is that dealt with in terms of the South African legislation? Now, South African law prescribes, as many other countries as well, that the patrimonial consequences of a marriage is governed by the domicile of the husband. Now, this is a very archaic and a very misogynistic approach. There are talks that the South African Law Reform Commission is investigating this specific matter or this concept, and probably we would see some changes in the new bills that are being presented to Parliament. So what does this mean, this patrimonial consequences that is governed by the domicile of the husband? It basically means that the laws of the place where the husband was domiciled when the marriage was concluded would be the law legal system that we would use. So in terms of a practical example, say for example, the husband was domiciled in England at the time when they entered into the marriage, and there was no antenuptial contract that was signed in South Africa, then the marriage will be governed by the English law. Thus, if it is a contested divorce, an opposed divorce, where the husband was domiciled in England, his domicile of choice was England at the time of the marriage, a South African court is then obliged, they must use the English law in respect of the patrimonial consequences of the divorce. Now, that is just dealing with assets and so forth, and how the estate will be divided. However, if there are things like child maintenance, matters or aspects surrounding children, care and contact, and so forth, then that will be dealt with under the South African law. That is just a synopsis of being married to a foreigner, and if you can divorce a foreigner in South Africa. The next clip is of a colleague of mine, Simon Dippenaar, that practices from Cape Town, and he specializes in these types of matters. And I've asked him to make use of his clip where he explains how to divorce a spouse that you do not know the whereabouts of. Over to you, Simon.
Do you want to divorce your spouse but you don't know where they are? Hi, I'm Simon Dippenaar and I'm a family lawyer. What then? This happens more often than you think. Now, couples from different home countries meet and marry, either overseas, elsewhere in Africa, or here in South Africa. Things don't work out and the spouses not only part ways, but countries. If contact is lost, it can be very hard to locate a missing spouse. Now, can you still get a divorce? Yes, you can. It can also happen within South Africa, and I'm going to talk about that too, though it is more common and arguably easier to disappear in another country. Our Divorce Act of 1979 states that summons for divorce must be issued on the defendant in person. But if you have no idea where your spouse is, the legislation has taken this into consideration and made it possible to divorce a missing spouse. The process is called substituted service and applies when your missing spouse cannot be traced but is believed to be in South Africa. The first step is to apply to the court for substituted service. You must produce an affidavit proving that you have done everything in your power to locate your missing spouse, the defendant. This includes trying to find their last known address, checking with neighbors, relatives, former employers, and friends, as well as searching on social media sites such as Facebook and Twitter. The court must be satisfied that there is no alternative but to issue summons via substituted service. It will decide on an appropriate method, such as advertising in a newspaper published in the area where the missing spouse is thought to live, or serving notice on a family member. Now, as we live in an increasingly digital age, a substituted notice can be served on a missing spouse via email or social media sites such as Facebook and LinkedIn, when personal service is not possible. If your missing spouse resides outside of South Africa, you must apply to the court for divorce papers to be served by an official of the court in the country of residence. This process is known as edictal citation. Notice will be served on your spouse in person at their home or work premises with 30 calendar days to defend the action. after which the divorce will be set down for hearing. There are a number of conditions you will need to satisfy, and it may take some time, but I can help you through the process.
Thank you for that, Simon. Now, a question that pops up in my office quite often is that if you want to divorce a spouse that you do not know the whereabouts of, how can you actually find that spouse, and what do you need to prove to court in order to get the order for substitute service? Now, first of all, you need to find the defendant's last known address. You have to tell the court, and you have to convince the court by means of an affidavit that you actually tried to establish the last known address. So start off, that would be your starting point, to go to the last address that is currently known to you. Check at that address. If there's other people living there and they do not have any information of the whereabouts of your ex-spouse, then surely you could ask the neighbors if they have any details and whereabouts, forwarding addresses, and so forth. Get their names and addresses, because you very likely would need to have an affidavit from them as well to substantiate your claim for substituted service. You could also ask relatives or friends, even former employees where you previously worked, or any other person that might know where you could find the defendant, because like I said, you would need to have some substantiated proof that you actually tried to locate the details of the missing spouse. You can also go online, search for the person online, like Simon mentioned, Facebook, LinkedIn, and so forth, to see if there's any other digital presence, social media presence of the defendant that you could use in order to locate that person. And then lastly, if you cannot find any of those information, you've been estranged from your ex-spouse for a couple of years, then it might be advisable to employ the services of a tracing agent that might assist you during this process as well. And that you could also file at court as proof that you actually tried to locate your ex-spouse. The next topic that we will be discussing is narcissism. Now, narcissism, and bearing in mind the disclaimer that I said right in the beginning, that I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, I do not portray to diagnose narcissistic behavior or narcissism, but I have a keen interest therein, so much so that I am currently busy with my doctorate in law, pertaining specifically to the use of narcissistic behaviors in divorce courts, and how that is manipulated and influenced by a person that displays narcissistic behavior. So I'm very wary about using the label narcissist. We use that word very often, and we label our ex-spouse as a narcissist, or a person being narcissistic in behavior. And I'm very careful with regards to that, because I've had instances where I was actually in court, and the presiding officer would ask me point blank, Mr. Opperman, what is your qualifications of diagnosing a person with narcissistic personality disorder? And then you have to tread on very thin ground, because we use that term very loosely. Now, it is a defined definition in the DSM, the manual that the psychiatrists and the psychologists use in order to diagnose psychiatric or mental disorders. Now, according to the DSM-5, the latest DSM-5, the NPD, or narcissistic personality disorder, is characterized by at least three specific characteristics. The one is it is a grandiose behavior. It is lack of or limited empathy, and then an obsessive need for admiration. Those are the three key factors that the psychiatrists and psychologists would use in order to diagnose someone with NPD. So grandiose behavior, that is usually an unrealistic, in a pervasive sense of superiority. That person feels that he is much more superior than anybody else. They often feel that they are entitled to certain privileges, and that they have to have preferential treatment when it comes to certain instances. And that is part of the grandiose behavior that a narcissistic person would explain or show. The other one is lack or limited empathy. People with NPD often struggle to connect emotionally with others. We see that quite often in our divorce summonses. And that is one of the reasons why there was irretrievable breakdown of a marriage. they might find that emotions might be burdensome because they have to have this grandiose behavior and the feeling of superiority during the course of the marriage, and that might lead to some struggles and some problems within the marriage itself. Lastly, the other aspect that the DSM also deals with is the obsessive need for admiration. Now, that coincides with very strong feelings for external validation. They want to feel validated because they are so superior. They might seek conscious reinforcement or continuous reinforcement via other people. So they flourish on the being important and the feeling of importance by other people. Professional achievements, they would do something and then tell the world that they've achieved that. That is all part of the grandiose behavior and the obsessive need for some form of admiration. Those are the characteristics defined by the DSM that the psychologists and the psychiatrists use to diagnose that. Now, I've written an ebook explaining narcissistic behavior and how you would go about during this whole divorce process. And the link is on the next couple of slides, where you can download the ebook, where it is explained in much more detail than we have time for during this short webinar. So during the whole course of my research, meeting with people, dealing with people, for some weird or wonderful reason, the universe conspired to give me all the narcissistic people when it comes to divorce. There are certain traits that you find during each and every divorce where a narcissistic person or a person that exhibits narcissistic behavior actually comes forward. Now, typical narcissistic behavior during divorce would include things like your spouse may love bomb you, and that we see often. They do something wrong, they get some pushback, and then they in order to feel grandiose, to feel important, they would love bomb you with either text messages, WhatsApp messages, or even gifts. They will obviously, during this whole process, and that is part of the makeup, that is the way that they operate. They will try and delay divorce proceedings, and that is to giving them the sense, or the false sense, that they have control over this whole divorce proceedings. They may also play the victim. As soon as if there is some pushback against a narcissistic person, they will turn around and they would play the victim and place all the blame on you. They may sometimes refuse to compromise on issues relating to divorce, such as things like, visitation rights, child custody, and so forth. And that is just a way of being difficult and wanting to be in control and manipulating the other party. It is not necessarily ill-intended, but most definitely they would try and delay the process by not giving the cooperation. They will try to game the system. What is meant by that is that they try to manipulate the whole system, and that is very prevalent, especially in divorce proceedings, where there is emotions, and if you do not conform to their idea, then there is some kind of a pushback, and they would try and control all the aspects and try to game the whole system. They may not show remorse to your feelings. So if you feel hurt about something that they did and so forth, they might not show any remorse during this whole process. And then last of all, a narcissistic person or person displaying narcissistic behavior will never quit. The aim is to win. One of my favorite sayings is the only way to win with a narcissist is not to play. But in a divorce situation where it's needed that you need to negotiate, you need to sit around the table and reach a settlement and so forth, that is quite sometimes not possible. But just bear in mind that they will never quit until they feel that they have won. On the next slide is how to deal with an ex-spouse that is a narcissist or displays narcissistic behavior. The one thing that I urge my clients is to organize your plans before you do anything. Get all your paperwork ready, get all your financials ready Do not alert the narcissist of your plans, because if they get wind of your plans and your intentions to file for divorce, then there might be some serious pushback. Copies of documents would just disappear. Original documents, marriage certificates, all those things that are usually locked in a safe for safekeeping, those are the things that definitely would disappear if you give a narcissistic person the heads up of what is about to happen. One of the other tips would be to stay calm and cool. That is always not possible, because there's a lot of talk about the black rock and the gray rock systems, where you cut off all communications. And like I've mentioned, the only way to win with a narcissist is not to play. But sometimes you have to engage into conversation or meaningful negotiations in order to finalize your divorce matter. But try and stay calm and cool. During this whole process, it might be wise to connect with your support system, your family members. Those are the people that would help you through this whole process, and keep you grounded. Avoid bad-mouthing a narcissistic person. As soon as you start bad-mouthing that narcissistic, they would see that as an invitation to enter into an argument with you. And that is exactly what they want. So steer away from bad-mouthing. If it's not factual, do not walk with your emotions on your sleeve. Try and keep as calm and collected and as emotionally detached as possible during this whole process. Another tip would also be is to secure at least an attorney that is strong enough to handle a narcissistic person. The normal, the run-of-the-mill attorney might be able to assist you, but if you have a ex-spouse or soon-to-be ex-spouse that is quite narcissistic, it might suit you better to find an attorney that deals specifically with these type of personality disorders, to know how the system works and to know how to counter the actions or the reactions of a narcissistic person. The next tip would be to set and implement healthy boundaries. The only way to win with a narcissist is not to play. Set healthy boundaries. Tell the narcissistic person that these are my boundaries, and as soon as they cross that boundary, then you let them know immediately. Do not let them cross that boundaries on a continuous basis, because then they would shift the goalposts each and every time. It might also be wise during this time to review your digital boundaries. Now, what is meant by that? It means simply that you reevaluate your privacy settings on your social media accounts. Do you still want your ex-spouse to be able to see, to connect, to see who's your friends on Facebook, for example, can see your contacts on LinkedIn or Instagram and so forth? Review your digital footprint at this stage, and decide what would suit you best. One of the other tips is also keep prioritizing self-care. During this whole process, which is not a nice process, I would urge you to exercise caution as to your emotional well-being. And that's why it's also very important to stay connected to family and friends that might be your support system during this whole process. Lastly, accept the reality of your situation. So many people coming to my office, they have this idea that the other person will change. And NPD or narcissistic personality disorder is just something, it might be a temporary thing. Very often it is not. It is usually a thing that comes over a couple of years, and it escalates as time goes on. And sometimes there might be that sense of, you know what, there is a possibility of change. There is a possibility of reconciliation. If you deal with a narcissistic person in a divorce situation, accept the reality of your situation, that things will definitely not change, and it would only get worse, and definitely not better. Dr. Stefani Sarkis mentioned in one of her research papers the whole aspect of gaslighting, which is fairly a new buzzword that we see quite often when you deal with divorce matters. Now, gaslighting is a manipulation tactic commonly used by a narcissistic person to gain power and make others question their own reality. And that is where the whole concept of gaslighting came in. Now, gaslighters follow strategies usually over a period of time. It's usually not isolated incidences, but it happens during the whole course of a marriage. You might have not realized that right at the beginning when you were still in the honeymoon phase, but most definitely towards the end, you would see a pattern of behavior indicating that he is gaslighting you. Now, what are the typical symptoms that we see specifically when it comes to divorce? They would tell blatant lies. That is a very good trait of a narcissistic person. They would deny that they ever said something. They would deny it categorically. They did not do that. They did not tell you that. Even if you have physical proof thereof, they would still deny that. They would also use what is near and dear to you as ammunition. I've also seen a couple of cases where the anger is directed towards family pets, for example. Now all of a sudden they hate the dog, they hate the cat, whereas previously when it was still in the honeymoon phase of the wedding or the marriage, then that was fine. But now all of a sudden they use it as ammunitions. Their actions would also not match their words. What they see and what they do is two different things. And after a bad act, after they've done something bad, they would compliment you, they would love bomb you, they would use positive reinforcement. And that is all just an attempt to keep you off guard and to make you think that they aren't that bad after all. Very often they would project their own actions or thinking or their way of thinking, of thoughts onto you. And they would align people against you and tell people very often that you are the crazy one, that you are the one that lost all your marbles, you're a couple of olives short of a martini. And they would try and structure this whole argument that you are the victim or that they are the victim and you are the abuser in this whole situation. They might also make you feel that you don't know who to trust or who you could turn to towards your support structure. Narcissistic people would often attack those people that are close to you, those people that offer you support. It might be family, it might be friends, it might be your immediate family, your brothers, your sister, your mom, your dad. They would approach those people with all these blatant lies, telling them that you are the guilty party, you're the one that is at fault, and so forth. So just be careful with regards to that when it comes to your support system, because you do not want to lose your support structure during this whole process. They would also tell everybody else that you are the liar in this process, that everything that you tell people are blatant lies. Whereas even though you might have proof to the contrary, they would still try and enforce that idea of you being a liar. Now, on the next slide, a narcissistic, and I'm going to repeat that again, the only way to win with a narcissist is not to play. But if you have to interact with a narcissist, if you don't take offense, you can't give any defense. And a narcissistic person loves it when you are into a defensive mode. They want that. They want you to argue. And they would try anything to evoke a certain kind of response from you in order to engage into an argument where they can actually bring you over to their side, or that is actually what is going on in their minds. Now, these are a couple of phrases that you could use in order to circumvent that. Now, it is a benign statement that actually do not mean anything, but those are things that the narcissistic person would normally not have an answer to. Things like, you know what, I see your point, or yeah, you've given me a lot to think about, or I explain myself to you. Now, that one actually might evoke some kind of a argumentative response. The one that I particularly like is, I can't control how you feel about me. Now, during settlement agreements, negotiations and so forth, at any stage that you feel uncomfortable with the talks about with a narcissistic person, This is the sentence that you could use. You know what? I cannot control how you feel about me. Now, all of these phrases are not a way that you have to agree with a narcissistic person. It is just benign phrases that they can't argue with easily. And then the fallback of that would be, if anything else fails, is just to say, you know what, I expected you to say that. I expected your pushback, your comeback on what I've just said. I expected you to say that. And then they would not have an answer with regards to that. Some final notes on narcissistic behavior. And like I said, you can read all of this in the ebook. A narcissistic person isn't going to accept the blame or culpability for creating tension or creating the situation where the marriage is at that stage. That's obviously not the way that they're wired, and their grandiose ego won't actually allow that. So the end goal would be here to diffuse the whole situation at hand. And it should not be for them to apologize or to admit blame, because they would definitely not do that. So a narcissistic person is also going to do everything that they can to bait you into arguing with them. That is what they want. That is their end goal, to enter into an argument with you. And that is not so that you can see his perspective, but so that they can actually try and manipulate you to agree with theirs. And as hard as it can be, try to not let them suck you into this circles, this detrimental circle of arguing. Also bear in mind that a narcissistic person can fly into a narcissistic rage with the slightest form of provocation. They can be tipped off in a split second. There are some inward signs, there's some outward signs. Some inward signs might include some passive-aggressive action or aggression, resentment, entitlement, and then also the most favorite that they use is sarcasm, where they would have these fine little pokes on your personality in order to put you down. Some outward signs may include screaming. Obviously, they do that quite well. Personal attacks, blame shifting, and other cruel and harmful behaviors, which might also lead up to a thing like physical abuse. Now, in the next portion, what we will go through is the whole idea of how can you prevent abuse during or even after divorce. So many people, what they think, if you ask them what is domestic abuse, what is domestic violence, they would give you basically two. They would say, you know what, physical abuse and sexual abuse, those are the two major forms of abuse. And that is actually not so. With the Domestic Violence Amendment Act that came into play in April this year, there are a number of other forms of abuse that have been identified. Emotional, verbal, and psychological abuse, economic abuse, intimidation, harassment, sexual harassment, coercive and controlling behavior. Those are all considered to be acts of domestic violence. Elder abuse, if a person is older, is an older person, as defined in the Older Persons Act, that might be considered to be abuse as well. Spiritual abuse is now also recognized as a formal form of abuse. And then the last one is the exposure of a child to any form of domestic abuse. So those are all the new definitions that the Act brought in during the amendments of the Domestic Violence Act that came into play in April this year. So, like I've mentioned, there's a couple of abuses or forms of abuse that have been identified. I'm not going to go through all of them. The most important is those that I would like to highlight is obviously coercive behavior, controlling behavior. Damage to property is quite self-explanatory. Economic abuse, which we will go into, sexual abuse, physical abuse. Those are all the forms of abuse that the Act actually recognize. So when one comes to economic abuse, now economic abuse is a fairly new concept. It's also used interchangeably with what they call financial abuse. Now, economic abuse is basically the disposal of household goods or property without your permission, or the use of financial resources, money, without your permission, or coercing the complainant, you as the complainant, into giving control over your assets that you might have, or your income, or to sign any document that would give effect thereto. Now, this is fair, like I said, this was in the previous act. It was slightly amended in the new act, but that does not fully comprehend and explain what the controlling behavior, specifically with reference to narcissism, also might be. Now, coercive behavior is also recognized as an act. This was a new definition that was brought in, where it says that coercive behavior means to compel or to force a complainant to abstain from doing anything that they would have a lawful right to do, or to do anything that they would have a lawful right to abstain from doing. So that's basically just coercive behavior, being coerced into doing something that you would normally not do, or do something that you would the other way around as well. More importantly is the aspect of controlling behavior that is also recognized in the new act. It was a new provision that was brought in, where it says that controlling behavior means the behavior towards a complainant that has the absolute effect, or the effect of making that person, the complainant, dependent on the abuser or subservient to the abuser. And that might include things like isolating them from their source of income, or their sources of support, to exploit their resources, their money, or capacities for personal gain, or they might deprive them from the means needed for escape. So, and this is usually where it comes in with narcissism, where people are still staying in that bad relationship because they do not have the monetary means to escape this whole situation. And then lastly, also regulating their everyday behavior. So the most important with regards to controlling behavior is the isolation of the resources, the exploitation thereof, depriving them of their means to escape, or to regulate their everyday behavior. Now, controlling behavior, coercive behavior, and economic abuse all falls into one package. I have yet to see the courts very keen to give you a protection order just for pure economic abuse. Usually there needs to be some form of manipulation, coercion, or controlling behavior as well in order for you to obtain a protection order. Like I've mentioned, I've written an ebook specifically on economic abuse, what it is and what you should know. You can follow the QR code, or you can simply venture over to our website where you could download the ebook and then read up on the whole workings, the ins and outs of specifically what is economic abuse. The next issue that I would like to stand still with is the issue of technology abuse, or abuse using technology. Other word for that is also technology facilitated abuse. Now, that is a form of controlling behavior that involves the use of technology as a means to coerce, to stalk, to harass, to control the behavior of another person. Now, if we think of technology that we currently use, now technology is such a vast concept, and we have technology in our daily life. We use technology. We use smartphones. I mean, there is absolutely nothing that is not done on this phone. So we are interconnected. We're connected by the Internet of Things. Geezers that goes on, TV remotes, the streaming like Netflix and so forth. So we connected all over with technology, and we cannot escape that. And most often abusers use technology in order to further the abuse, even after they've left the relationship or they have been divorced. And this is where the tech abuse comes in. Now, tech abuse is not formally recognized in terms of the amendments of the act, and there is actually talk that they would do submissions to the South African Law Reform Commission to specifically mention tech abuse as a form of domestic violence. Although in the act it is slightly mentioned, just in a couple of words, and that deals with harassment in section E, where it says the monitoring or tracking of the complainant's movements, activities without consent, including, for example, by the use of technology. Now, we also have the Cyber Crimes Act that comes into play, but that deals with the protection of information when it comes to technology. So that does not fully come to our aid, but most definitely using the technology as a form of abuse might also fall under the controlling, the coercive behavior aspect of that is considered to be domestic violence. Now, like I've mentioned, we are all connected, and there are certain tools that are for our benefit that we use on a daily basis, but could also be used by a perpetrator in furtherance of domestic abuse. And that might include things like smartphones, PCs, laptops, tablets, normal phones, home automation that could be used, apps, all the apps that we have on our cell phones. I mean, we can do anything from banking to ordering things online, or to switch on lights, to open a garage door, and so forth. That is all apps that is there to protect us or to make the life easier for us, but it could also be used to our detriment. Obviously, there's also then online abuse, by the way, by means of social media in exploitation of details that could be put in the cyberspace that could be to your detriment. And that would also be classified as tech abuse. Just in general, emotional abuse, if we're thinking now in terms of tech abuse and how abusers could use technology for domestic abuse. If one thinks about emotional abuse, I think we think of things like cyber stalking, the hijacking of your profile, impersonation. They might open a new Facebook account on your name, monitoring your everyday whereabouts. If you have something like Google Maps on your phone, then surely you could be tracked by geolocation as well. If you post photos of where you are, those are all geo-tracked, and those could all link you back to where you have been, and that could all be traced back to your phone using technology. Recordings, yes, we very often send voice notes, WhatsApp notes, and so forth. Those are all recordings that are stored somewhere in cyberspace, and it could be used against you. Sexual abuse, yes, specifically when it comes to using technology, I'm thinking of things like revenge porn. Your ex-spouse might use intimate photos of you that was captured with or without your permission during the marriage, could use to your disadvantage and post them all over social media and so forth. Economic abuse, locking you out of your bank account. If you have a narcissistic ex, then he might block you from accessing your details on your phone. Usually what happens is that it is usually the husband that sets up all the devices in the home. They might set up the PC, they set up the cell phones. So they would have the username and passwords of all these apps and all these tools that is actually created for your benefit that might make your life easier. But they would have that, and they could use that against you in terms of domestic violence, using your bank account or your Takealot account and so forth to order things that you did not order. I've had a case last year in February where the divorced spouse, they were busy with a divorce. She received tremendous loads of gifts that she all ordered, or the ex-spouse ordered on her name, and it was sent to her via Takealot. She did not give permission thereto, but he had access to all her banking statements or banking accounts and Takealot accounts. So he could do that while he was not even on the premises. He was not even in the country at that stage, but he organized that via the app. Apps also used to track the spending. That's usually with the normal spending apps like your banking statements and so forth that are available on your cell phone. Coercive and controlling behavior when it comes to using technology, manipulation, controlling the everyday behavior. They want to control the narcissist or the ex-spouse using technology as a form of domestic violence. They would try and control your everyday behavior, gaslighting, spying, monitoring your every move, and so forth, as well as cyber stalking. So this is just a model just in order to end off what we usually see in practice. We've got at least 3 phases where abuse is affected by technology. So first of all, you would have the physical control phase. Now that is usually still in the time that the parties live together. They stay in the same home. The husband would set up all the accounts. He would set up the cell phones. He would set up the tablets and the PCs with usernames and passwords and so forth. So it's during that time that you, as the person wanting to leave the relationship, is living still with the abuser. And the abuser that is then at that stage physically controls and monitors that technology. So he would see that he would have full control over all the appliances and all the apps and all the devices during that stage. Now, the survivor, here's the person that wants to leave the relationship, then uses privacy and security practices to hide the technology use. So you might actually sit on the PC and then search for information, like watching a webinar, for example, on how to divorce a narcissist, or do some Google research on how to divorce a narcissist. And then you would have to use privacy and security practices in order to hide that. Because if your husband or your soon-to-be ex-husband finds out that you were actually trying to do research on leaving the relationship, that might be a high-risk area. The next area would be the escape phase. Now, it's the escape phase is usually dealt with in 2 sections. It's still during the control phase where you, as the person living with the abuser, is trying to leave the common household, and then moving towards it to the escape phase, the second phase of the escape phase, where you actually leave the relationship or leave the marital home. So what is explained with that? That is when you try to leave the abuser. The survivor, uses the person that wants to leave, uses privacy and security practices to hide all the escape plans. You've been clued up. You know how to delete your internet browser, to clear your cache, and so forth. That is the first stage of the escape phase, and that is usually when your soon-to-be ex-partner realizes that something's going on and something needs to be done, and you are busy with something, but they do not quite know what, because they do not have full control of exactly what has been watched on or searched for on Google and so forth. That is usually the acute phase. That is the most dangerous phase, and we see the most of the physical abuse also emanates specifically during this phase. The second phase of the escape phase is when you sever digital ties with the abuser, apart from physical control. So you probably changed your passwords and so forth, and you would move away from the physical control that person, the soon-to-be ex-spouse, might have over some of the devices. The last phase is the life apart phase. That is usually when you left the abuser, and that is usually we also see that after divorce, when you start building and maintaining a new life away from the abuser, and then to totally being offline from the control of the abuser or your ex-spouse, and that is usually where you change your username and passwords, you hide your contact information, you review your security settings on your social media platforms, you remove your relationship status and so forth. That is the life apart phase. But we will be dealing with if you are interested in technology abuse, there will be a couple of webinars coming up quite soon dealing with aspects of how perpetrators use technology. And I'll also explain to you how to change the security settings on your devices, on your smartphone, how to change your Google passwords. That's also vitally important, because your abuser, even if though you might change your username and password, there might be security questions that, for example, Google uses. What is your mom's maiden name? What is your first dog's name? Where were you born? If the abuser or your ex-husband knows those type of questions, those type of intimate questions, then he would be able to change your password back to where it was, so that he could have full control. Those are just a couple of aspects with regards to how abusers use technology to commit acts of domestic violence. But if you are interested, drop me a line. I'll give you the details of the upcoming webinars dealing specifically with technology abuse. That basically brings us right to the end of this session of Lunch and Learn. We have a couple of ebooks that you are welcome to download and to distribute free of charge. Those are just ebooks that deals with specifically divorces, same-sex marriages in terms of the Civil Union Act. The latest one that we also brought in was Divorcing with Dignity, how the whole process of mediation works when it comes to divorce. The economic abuse ebook is also there, as well as the detailed one about divorcing a narcissist. These books are all available on our website, where you can venture over to www.oppermansinc.co.za, and you can download those ebooks on our website free of charge. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Eugene Opperman. I'm a family law practitioner. I've been doing so for the past 23 years. And it was a great pleasure hosting today's webinar for you. Thank you so much to Erin O'Neill that compiled the ebook, as well as Simon Dippenaar for his contribution. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you soon for the last episode of Lunch and Learn during this divorce week, Divorce Awareness Week. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, if you need some legal advice or you need assistance with your matter, please reach out to us. The details are on the screen. Also very important, please read the disclaimer on the next slide. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another episode of Lunch and Learn. Have a good afternoon further.